a millionaire on his way to the airport encounters a life-changing moment. While driving through the rain-soaked streets of New York City, Alexander Grayson, a focused and pragmatic CEO of a major financial corporation, spots a young woman holding a baby on the corner of the sidewalk. She's drenched, trembling, and shielding her baby from the rain with nothing but her own body and a soaked coat. Her sign reads, "Please help, we need food and shelter." For a brief moment, Alexander remembers his own difficult childhood, but quickly pushes the memory aside, focusing on his busy schedule. However, something stirs within him, a rare sense of empathy that he has suppressed for years. He hesitates, then lowers his car window and gestures for her to approach. When she does, he opens the car door and firmly but gently says, "Get in." The woman hesitates, but, for her baby's sake, steps inside. The car's warmth contrasts with the harshness of the outside world. The woman, whose name is Grace, clutches her baby, Lucy, tightly. Alexander, watching her through the rearview mirror, notices her exhaustion, but also her quiet dignity. Though he barely knows why, he decides to change his plans. Instead of heading to the airport, he drives toward his sprawling modern mansion, a place devoid of much human warmth. When they arrive, Grace stares at the magnificent home in disbelief. Alexander steps out, hands her a silver key, and tells her she can stay until he returns the next day. Grace, overwhelmed with gratitude and disbelief, thanks him, her voice trembling. Alexander brushes it off, avoiding eye contact, as he tells her to take care of herself and the baby. He leaves without waiting for more words, unsettled by this uncharacteristic act of compassion, but also unwilling to examine why it happened. For both Alexander and Grace, this moment is the beginning of an unexpected story, one that neither of them could have foreseen. Alexander walked back to his car, avoiding a backward glance. He had a flight to catch and a critical meeting ahead, one that could shape the future of his company. Yet, as he drove toward the airport, a strange, lingering unease gnawed at him. Grace wasn't just another person in need he had briefly helped. There was something about her that stayed with him, a connection he didn't fully understand or want to acknowledge. Meanwhile, Grace stood in silence at the entrance of Alexander's mansion, overwhelmed. The warmth of the house embraced her, a stark contrast to the cold rain outside. She took a deep breath, the subtle fragrance of the space calming her nerves. Holding Lucy close, she began to explore the enormous living room where elegant furniture, stunning artwork, and a dazzling crystal chandelier created an otherworldly atmosphere. Every step made her feel as though she had stepped into a dream, a reality so distant from her own that it felt surreal. For Grace, this was more than a house. It was a sanctuary, a place where she could finally let her guard down, even if just for one night. As the storm continued to rage outside, she found a cozy bedroom and carefully placed Lucy on a soft bed. The little girl's eyes sparkled as she looked around the luxurious room. Grace, seeing her daughter safe and content for the first time in what felt like forever, couldn't hold back a smile, one filled with rare, genuine joy. As night fell, Grace allowed herself to breathe, to rest. She closed the door to the room, leaving behind the weight of her struggles, if only for a moment. The house, with its grandeur and serenity, was a haven she had never dared to imagine. She marveled at the tall windows, the lush garden visible beyond them, and the pristine decor that seemed almost too perfect to touch. Hunger eventually tugged at her, and she wandered into the immaculate kitchen. The modern appliances gleamed, and she hesitated, feeling like an intruder in a space so far removed from her own reality. But the pangs of hunger, along with the need to nourish Lucy, overcame her hesitation. She opened the refrigerator and was astonished by the sight of fresh fruits, vegetables, and neatly organized shelves of food. She gently set Lucy down on a nearby sofa, ensuring the baby was still fast asleep, and began gathering simple ingredients: eggs, vegetables, and bread. As Grace cooked, stirring eggs in a skillet, a quiet sense of peace filled her. For most, cooking might seem routine, but for her, it was a symbol of stability, a rare moment of control and normalcy in her otherwise chaotic life. The aroma of the food filled the air, and Grace found herself smiling, a feeling of gratitude and hope blossoming within her. She prepared a small meal, cutting pieces for Lucy and imagining her daughter's delight. When the food was ready, Grace sat at the table, feeding Lucy with tenderness. The little girl's giggles and delighted expressions filled the room, making Grace laugh softly despite her exhaustion. This simple act of sharing a meal felt monumental, a fleeting yet profound moment of happiness. After dinner, Grace wandered the house, searching for a place to bathe Lucy and perhaps take a moment for herself. She discovered the master bathroom, and its sheer opulence left her speechless. The white marble walls, heated floors, and a spacious bathtub that could fit two gleamed under soft, ambient lighting. It was a space she couldn't have dreamed of in her wildest fantasies. This night, though improbable and fleeting, felt like a small miracle. Grace held onto it tightly, knowing that moments of safety and peace were rare for someone like her. For the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope, a fragile but precious gift amidst the storm of her life. Standing in the luxurious bathroom, Grace felt like an outsider in a world she didn't belong to. Yet, faced with the rare chance to give her daughter some comfort, she decided that, at least for one night, she would embrace this moment. She filled the tub with warm water and carefully undressed Lucy, gently lowering her into the soothing bath. Lucy's face lit up in surprise, and soon her laughter echoed through the room as she splashed around, filling the space with an almost magical happiness. Grace smiled, washing her daughter's tiny hands and face, marveling at the simple joy on Lucy's face. Afterward, she wrapped her in a soft robe she found in the closet, her heart swelling with gratitude for the small moments of peace. Once Lucy was settled, Grace finally allowed herself the luxury of a warm bath. As the water cascaded over her, it felt as though it carried away the weight of the hardships she had endured, cold nights, endless struggles, and memories that still haunted her. For a brief moment, Grace closed her eyes and let herself remember a time when life was full of possibilities. Back then, she had a home, a bright future, and dreams that felt within reach. But life, with its cruel unpredictability, had pushed her far from that path. As she stepped out of the bath and wrapped herself in another soft robe, she felt a faint sense of renewal, as though she'd left a small piece of her pain behind. Lucy, now sleepy, rested peacefully on the large bed, surrounded by pillows. Grace lay beside her, holding her close. The warmth of the room and the gentle scent of the clean sheets gave her a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in a long time. As she cradled Lucy in her arms, waves of exhaustion overtook her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Grace drifted into a deep, worry-free sleep. That night, her dreams weren't plagued by nightmares. Instead, she saw glimpses of her younger self, full of hope and ambition. She had been a dedicated student with big dreams of building a future, someone who believed she could change the world. Those dreams, however, had been derailed by tragedy, the loss of her parents in a devastating accident. She remembered the crushing weight of that late-night phone call and the overwhelming grief that followed. It was a turning point that shattered the life she had once known. After her parents' death, Grace lost not just her family, but also the financial and emotional support that had kept her grounded. Medical school, once a beacon of hope, became a nearly insurmountable challenge. She took on jobs to stay afloat, but sleepless nights and endless stress began to take their toll. The burden was too heavy, and her once bright future started slipping away. During that dark time, she met Christopher, a man who seemed to bring light into her life. Charming and empathetic, he became her friend and confidant, giving her a glimmer of hope when she needed it most. Christopher made her believe that life could still be beautiful, that she could find joy again. As the first rays of sunlight crept into the room, Grace slowly woke, her mind caught between dreams and reality. She opened her eyes to see Lucy's serene face beside her, and for a moment, everything felt right. The soft bed, the warm blanket, and the safety of the room reminded her that, even if only briefly, she had found a safe haven. But as her gaze wandered over the elegant surroundings, her thoughts drifted back to her past. The memories flooded in, sharp and painful, a reminder of how far she had fallen from the life she had once envisioned. Yet, holding Lucy close, she found herself determined to keep fighting. The peace of this night, however fleeting, had given her a renewed sense of hope. Grace resolved to do whatever it took to create a better future for Lucy, a life free from the struggles that had defined her own. Grace entered her relationship with Christopher, believing she had found love and unwavering support. She trusted him completely, sharing her fears, dreams, and vulnerabilities. For a time, he seemed like a pillar of comfort in her stormy life. But as the months passed, Christopher began to change. The man who had once been gentle and understanding became controlling and cold. His caring gestures turned into harsh words, and his kindness gave way to demands. Grace, who had once felt secure in his presence, now felt trapped in a relationship built on manipulation and deceit. Without her knowledge, Christopher started draining the small savings account she had set aside for emergencies. He siphoned off small amounts at first, but by the time Grace noticed, it was too late. Her savings were gone. When she confronted him, hoping for an explanation, his true nature emerged. He laughed cruelly at her, dismissing her feelings and admitting he had only ever been interested in her money. He had enjoyed watching her depend on him, relishing the power it gave him. Then, without remorse, he left her, abandoning her both emotionally and financially. That night, Grace found herself alone, penniless, and pregnant with a child she hadn't had the chance to plan for. Stripped of her financial resources and emotional support, she had no choice but to leave medical school. She searched desperately for work, hoping to rebuild her life, but every attempt was met with rejection and disdain. The once promising backdrop of New York City, a place she had once seen as full of opportunities, now felt like a battleground where survival was her only focus. Despite the challenges, Grace never gave up. Her daughter Lucy became her sole reason for enduring the cold nights, hunger, and constant uncertainty. Each threat she faced, each moment of exhaustion, was borne silently for Lucy's sake. When Grace looked into her daughter's eyes, she forced herself to smile, concealing the fear and pain that lingered in her heart. She made a silent promise: Lucy would not inherit the weight of her struggles. Now, as Grace sat in Alexander's mansion, surrounded by warmth and safety, a deep gratitude welled within her. The contrast between her hardships and the kindness Alexander had shown was overwhelming. He didn't know her story, yet he had offered her a rare reprieve, a night of peace and shelter. She wondered how she could ever thank him properly. It wasn't just the physical refuge he had provided, it was the sense of hope that had come with it. In this house, Grace and Lucy could sleep without fear for the first time in years. As Grace watched Lucy sleep peacefully, she thought of her past, the happy moments with her parents, the bright future she once envisioned, and the love she had believed in before life took a darker turn. That night, she made a promise to herself. She would not let Alexander's generosity go to waste. His act of kindness had rekindled something within her, a belief that kindness still existed in the world, even when life seemed at its darkest. Determined to start anew, Grace resolved to honor Alexander's gesture. With Lucy in her arms and newfound strength in her heart, she vowed to rebuild her life, no matter how difficult the road ahead. She knew Alexander might never fully understand the depth of her gratitude, but she would carry it with her and let it drive her forward. The next morning, Alexander returned to the mansion earlier than expected due to a last-minute change in his schedule. As he entered his home, he sensed something different, an unusual warmth in the air. He paused in the hallway, and for the first time in years, he heard something unfamiliar in his house, the sound of laughter, a baby's laughter. Curious, Alexander followed the sound to the guest room corridor, where he found the door slightly ajar. Peering inside, he was greeted by a sight he could never have anticipated: Grace and Lucy, sharing a moment of joy that filled the room with a rare lightness. For a man whose life had been defined by precision and control, the scene struck him deeply, stirring emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. The room, bathed in soft afternoon light, radiated a peaceful warmth. Grace sat on the floor with Lucy, playfully making a stuffed bear dance from side to side. Lucy, her face lighting up with laughter, eagerly tried to grab the toy, only for Grace to move it just out of reach again. The sound of Lucy's giggles filled the room, and Grace's face glowed with genuine joy and affection, emotions that Alexander immediately noticed as he stood silently at the doorway, captivated by the scene. For a moment, Alexander observed them without interrupting. There was a simplicity in the moment, a pure and rare happiness that stirred something unfamiliar within him. Grace and Lucy had brought an energy into his home that he hadn't realized was missing. Without noticing it, a soft smile appeared on his face, and he felt an unexpected sense of longing, a recognition of something absent in his life. Sensing his presence, Grace turned her head, slightly startled. Embarrassed, she quickly put the stuffed bear down and pulled Lucy closer to her. She hesitated, as if afraid of being reprimanded for appearing too comfortable. But Alexander's gentle voice broke the silence. "No need to stop on my account," he said, his tone softer than she had expected. It carried a hint of encouragement. Grace relaxed slightly, though her expression still held traces of surprise and gratitude. She looked at Alexander, her eyes filled with a sincerity that was hard to ignore. He saw how much this moment of safety and comfort meant to her, how deeply she valued something he had taken for granted, his home. "I didn't know you'd be back so soon," Grace said quietly, her voice trembling slightly but steady with dignity. Alexander stepped closer, his gaze falling on Lucy. The little girl looked up at him with wide, curious eyes and reached out her tiny hand. Without thinking, Alexander extended his finger, which Lucy grasped with surprising strength. Her innocent gesture brought an unexpected smile to his face. The simplicity of her touch, her untainted joy, resonated with him in a way he couldn't explain. "She's amazing," Alexander murmured, his eyes softening as he looked at Grace. Grace's face brightened with a proud, emotional smile. "Yes, she is," she whispered, holding Lucy closer. Her voice grew even softer. "And I don't know how to thank you. Having a safe night, a roof over our heads after so long, it feels like a dream." Alexander felt the weight of her words. He hadn't fully understood what his simple act of kindness meant to her until now. Her gratitude was so genuine, so heartfelt, that it awakened something within him, a sense of responsibility and connection that he hadn't expected. "Grace," he said, his voice steady yet sincere, "there's no need to thank me. Honestly, I think I needed this as much as you did." Grace's eyes widened in surprise. She had never imagined that someone like Alexander, a man who seemed so powerful and self-assured, could admit to needing anything, let alone someone like her and her daughter. Yet, in that moment, he seemed almost vulnerable, his admission hinting at a loneliness she hadn't seen before. "Even so," she replied softly, "I'm grateful, more than I can say. This place, this chance, it's more than I could have ever asked for." Holding Lucy closer, Grace felt a wave of relief wash over her. The knowledge that her daughter would sleep safely tonight was a gift she couldn't put into words. Alexander watched her, struck by her quiet strength and resilience. Despite everything she had endured, she radiated kindness and determination. He admired the way she embraced Lucy with such fierce love, and he couldn't help but wonder how she had managed to maintain such grace in the face of so much hardship. Before leaving the room, Alexander knelt down and gently touched Lucy's cheek. The baby laughed, holding his finger as though it were her favorite toy. In that moment, Alexander felt something shift inside him. A warmth, a tenderness he hadn't felt in years. It was small, but profound, a spark he couldn't ignore. As Alexander walked away, Grace sat quietly, holding Lucy tightly. She felt a peace she hadn't known in years. His generosity had been more than just an offer of shelter. It was a reminder of hope and human connection, something she hadn't believed in for a long time. This quiet moment of understanding and shared humanity left an invisible but powerful mark on them both, changing the course of their lives in ways neither could yet foresee. Victoria couldn't quite figure out what had changed in Alexander, but as they talked, she began to notice a difference in the mansion. From upstairs, she faintly heard the sound of a child's laughter. Her brow furrowed as she tried to make sense of it, and her curiosity quickly turned into determination. Interrupting their conversation, Victoria strode purposefully toward the sound. Alexander hesitated, watching her walk away. A part of him knew this moment would come, that Victoria would discover Grace and Lucy's presence in the house. Yet, he found himself unwilling to hide them. He stayed behind, letting her uncover the truth for herself. Turning a corner, Victoria came upon Grace, who was holding Lucy in her arms. Her face froze in shock for a moment before quickly hardening into an expression of distrust and resentment. Victoria's sharp eyes scanned Grace, taking in every detail, from her simple clothes to the protective way she cradled her daughter. Lucy, unaware of the tension, looked at Victoria with curious, innocent eyes. Grace, however, immediately sensed the hostility hidden beneath Victoria's scrutinizing gaze. "And who might you be?" Victoria asked, her voice laced with mockery and a venomous smile. Grace hesitated, the tension thick in the air, but she responded with calm politeness. "I'm Grace, and this is my daughter Lucy," she said, her voice steady despite the discomfort she felt under Victoria's piercing stare. Victoria suppressed a sarcastic laugh as her gaze raked over Grace again, dripping with disdain. She quickly pieced together that Alexander must have offered shelter to this woman and her child. The thought ignited a wave of jealousy in her. The idea that Alexander, so controlled and private, would care for someone like Grace, a stranger in her eyes, was unbearable. After a moment of strained silence, Victoria spun on her heel and marched back to Alexander's study, her face now betraying her growing distrust and jealousy. Without hesitation, she addressed him with thinly veiled contempt. "So, the young woman I just met upstairs," she began, her tone dripping with irony. "Is she your latest guest?" Alexander remained calm, though he couldn't entirely hide his discomfort. He had anticipated this reaction from Victoria, but it didn't make the moment any easier. "Grace and her daughter are going through a difficult time," he said evenly. "I offered to help." Victoria narrowed her eyes, her jealousy simmering just beneath the surface. She couldn't reconcile the Alexander she thought she knew, a reserved and calculating man, with someone who would open his home to a stranger. Her voice took on an edge as she pressed further. "Don't you think it's risky, Alexander, letting someone you barely know stay here? She could easily be taking advantage of your kindness," Victoria said, her tone suggestive. Alexander didn't immediately respond, but her words planted a seed of doubt in his mind. He had always valued security and control in his life, and Victoria's pointed remarks unsettled him. Seeing the hesitation in his expression, Victoria leaned in, determined to twist the knife. "Think about it," she continued. "A woman with a child, a perfect situation to manipulate someone like you. How can you be sure she's trustworthy?" Alexander felt the weight of her words pressing down on him. A part of him resisted the notion of doubting Grace, but another part couldn't entirely ignore the implications. Needing clarity, he decided to confront the situation directly. With a heavy sigh, he made his way upstairs to Grace's room. The tension in his demeanor was unmistakable, and as he entered the room, Grace immediately felt a chill. The warmth she had begun to feel in this house now seemed fragile, threatened by the shift in Alexander's expression. He approached her, his voice steady but serious. "Grace, I need to understand more about your situation. Is there something you're not telling me?" Caught off guard, Grace felt cornered. The tone of his words, though measured, carried an undertone of judgment. She took a deep breath, her heart heavy, and tried to respond. "I've already told you what's important," she said, her voice trembling. "I never wanted to take advantage of your kindness." Alexander studied her carefully, noting the sincerity in her words, but the doubt Victoria had sown lingered in his mind. Grace, seeing the conflict in his eyes, felt a sharp sting of humiliation. She realized that the safe haven she had thought she found might only be temporary, an illusion that could disappear at any moment. The doubt in Alexander's expression was a painful blow to Grace's pride. She had no way to prove her honesty, and the weight of his suspicion cut deep. Feeling humiliated and overwhelmed, she struggled to hold back her emotions, knowing that everything she held dear, her daughter's safety and their brief moment of peace, now felt precariously close to slipping away. Grace held Lucy tightly, her resolve firm. Without saying another word, she made up her mind. She would not stay where she wasn't truly accepted. "I think I understand," she said, her voice steady, but carrying the weight of deep pain. "Thank you for your help, Alexander, but Lucy and I have stayed long enough." With those words, she left the room, her back straight, her steps deliberate, never once looking back. In the days following their departure, Alexander found himself trapped in a strange restlessness. The mansion, once his sanctuary, now felt cold and uninviting. Its silence, which he used to treasure, became oppressive. Every corner reminded him of Grace's gentle presence and Lucy's joyful laughter. The echoes of his solitary footsteps seemed to mock him, replaying the moments when their warmth had filled the space. As Alexander tried to immerse himself in his work, the memories of Grace and Lucy refused to leave him. He saw flashes of Grace's serene expression as she cared for her daughter and heard the echoes of Lucy's giggles. He remembered the lightness Grace brought to the house and the simple yet profound joy of Lucy holding his finger with her tiny hand. These moments had etched themselves into his mind, and he realized how profoundly they had touched him. Grace's departure left a void he couldn't ignore. The image of her pained expression when he questioned her honesty haunted him. She hadn't fought back, hadn't tried to defend herself. Instead, she had quietly accepted his doubt as though her truth wasn't enough. Her hurt and dignity lingered in his thoughts, amplifying his guilt. Every word of suspicion he had uttered felt cruel in hindsight. As days passed, Alexander couldn't escape the weight of his regret. He questioned why he had allowed Victoria's venomous words to cloud his judgment. Needing answers, he made a decision. He hired a private investigator to uncover Grace's past. If he had wronged her by doubting her, he needed to make it right, to find out the truth. The waiting was agonizing. As the investigator did his work, Alexander struggled to focus on his responsibilities. The memories of Grace and Lucy continued to intrude, and the emptiness of the mansion only deepened his sense of loss. He thought about Grace's gratitude for the shelter he had offered and the warmth that their presence had brought to his home. It had been a fleeting transformation, but it had changed everything for him. When the investigator's report finally arrived, Alexander opened it with a mix of urgency and dread. As he read, Grace's life unfolded before him. She had been a brilliant student, full of promise, until tragedy struck with the loss of her parents. Her life had been marked by pain, betrayal, and abandonment. She had endured an abusive relationship, been left to fend for herself, and had struggled to protect Lucy amidst crushing poverty. Every detail revealed her resilience and integrity, and Alexander felt the full weight of his mistake. Grace had never been a schemer, never sought anything from him but a safe place to rest. Yet he had doubted her, allowed someone else's jealousy to poison his perception of her. His regret was overwhelming. He realized how unfair and selfish he had been, and the guilt consumed him. By believing Victoria's insinuations, he had driven away someone who had brought warmth and humanity into his life. As he continued reading, Alexander saw Victoria's role in a new light. Her manipulation and coldness now disgusted him. The connection he thought they shared had been nothing more than an illusion, built on superficial appearances and control. Realizing this, Alexander felt a newfound urgency to find Grace, not only to apologize, but to express how deeply her presence had affected him. Determined to make amends, Alexander contacted the investigator again, this time asking him to locate Grace and Lucy. The thought of losing the chance to fix his mistake filled him with fear. That night, he couldn't sleep, replaying every moment he had shared with Grace. He thought of her quiet strength, the way she had looked at him with gratitude and respect despite her hardships, and the affection she showed for her daughter. The next day, Alexander received Grace's location. Relief washed over him, but it was quickly followed by a new fear. What if it was too late? What if Grace wouldn't forgive him? Yet, despite his anxiety, he knew one thing for certain: he had to try. Grace and Lucy had transformed his life in ways he couldn't fully explain, and he wasn't about to let them slip away without fighting for their forgiveness and trust. Alexander didn't know how Grace would react to seeing him again. He didn't know if she would accept his apology or simply wish for him to leave. But he was resolute. He was willing to do whatever it took for her to understand the sincerity of his regret and how deeply he needed her and Lucy back in his life. As he drove to the address where Grace was staying, his heart raced with a mix of anxiety and hope. This was more than just an attempt to right a wrong. It was the chance to embrace a life he hadn't planned, but now realized he desperately wanted. When he arrived, he stood at the door for a moment, steadying himself before knocking. He was prepared for rejection, but determined not to let fear stop him. When the door opened, Grace appeared, her expression a mix of surprise and caution. For a moment, Alexander felt small, humbled by the weight of the pain he had caused her. Taking a deep breath, he began, his voice trembling with emotion. "Grace, please," he said softly. "I know I'm probably the last person you wanted to see, but give me a chance. I made a terrible mistake. I let doubts and insecurities cloud my judgment, and I was unfair to you." He paused, searching her face for any sign of how she felt. "Since you and Lucy left, I've realized how much you both mean to me. The house, my life. Everything has felt so empty without you." Grace listened silently, her expression unreadable, but Alexander could see the conflict in her eyes. Encouraged by the slight softening in her gaze, he pressed on. "Grace, you showed me something I didn't even know I was missing. You gave me a new perspective on what truly matters. I'm not just here to apologize. I'm here to ask you to come back home with me. I want to give you and Lucy the home you deserve. Not as guests, but as part of my life. Part of our lives." Grace took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. For so long, she had carried the weight of distrust and abandonment, and those scars lingered in her heart. She looked away briefly, her eyes landing on Lucy, who was playing nearby. As she watched her daughter, memories of their struggles and fleeting moments of hope surfaced. And now, standing before Alexander, she felt life offering her something new, a second chance. His words, filled with genuine regret, touched her deeply. She turned her gaze back to him and saw an honesty in his eyes that calmed her. She realized that forgiving him wasn't just about him. It was about giving Lucy the chance to grow up in a home where love and safety were possible. Lucy, sensing the emotions in the room, approached Alexander. Her curious eyes sparkled as she reached out her arms. "Uncle Alex," she said sweetly, "are you coming with us?" Her innocent question made Alexander's heart swell. He knelt to her level, opening his arms and pulling her into a hug. "Yes, my little one," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "I'll come with you, forever." Seeing Lucy's spontaneous gesture and Alexander's response, Grace felt something inside her shift. It was as though her daughter's innocence had given her the permission she needed to let go of the pain she carried. A soft smile spread across her face, and when Alexander looked up, he saw her expression, full of tenderness and understanding. "I accept, Alexander," Grace said, her voice heavy with emotion, "but with one condition, that what we build is real. No fears, no distrust." Alexander nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "I promise, Grace. I swear we'll build something real, together, and nothing, no one, will take it away from us." He pulled her into an embrace, the weight of his guilt and regret finally lifting. In that moment, Alexander felt a certainty he had never known before. The love and trust growing between them were stronger than any fear or doubt he had carried. When they returned to the mansion, the once cold and formal environment felt transformed. Lucy's laughter echoed through the halls, filling every corner with warmth. Grace's gaze, now bright and serene, reflected the peace and happiness Alexander had been longing for. Victoria, upon hearing of their reconciliation, was struck by the bitter reality of her defeat. She hadn't just lost Alexander to another woman, she had lost him to a family he had chosen to build with sincerity and love. Consumed by humiliation and anger, she left, knowing she would never hold the place in his heart she once thought was hers. Over time, the mansion became a true home, not just for Alexander but for Grace and Lucy as well. Their lives intertwined in a way that brought them all a sense of purpose and fulfillment. Alexander knew he had found something priceless, a life filled with warmth, love, and the family he had never realized he needed. Alexander offered Grace a meaningful position in his company, a place where she could dedicate herself, grow professionally, and build a stable future. He made it clear that he would be there to support her at every step of the way. Together, they began to construct a genuine life, built on trust and mutual respect. For Lucy, Alexander became much more than just a constant presence. He became the father figure she had always needed. In caring for the little girl, Alexander found a sense of purpose he had never known before. One sunny afternoon, while they were playing in the garden, Lucy looked up at him with her innocent eyes and called him Dad for the first time. It was a moment that struck Alexander to his core, the greatest title he had ever received, and one that filled his heart with overwhelming joy. Each day that followed became a step toward a life they could all cherish, a life where love, trust, and happiness flourished. Together, Alexander, Grace, and Lucy became the family they had all been yearning for in their own ways. In their home, love and hope were no longer fleeting dreams, but constants that blossomed with each new morning. Surrounded by the warmth and joy of this new life, the past became just a distant memory, a chapter closed. Their present, however, was a promise renewed daily, to love, to grow, and to build a future filled with hope. Hand in hand, they faced the world as a family, stronger together than they had ever been apart. Thank you for experiencing this heartfelt story of transformation, resilience, and love. If this emotional journey resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful and inspiring stories. Let us know your thoughts on this touching ending, and we'll see you in the next story.